Carmel Training Center webinar. With us today we have Rachel Caplin, and we will do a webinar on technology and the aging population. We would like you to bear with us for a couple of minutes when we let everybody in. So in a couple of minutes we'll commence. As you'll see when you join us, your microphones are actually turned off. This is to ensure there is no background noise and you can actually hear the session properly. And also your videos are turned off or on, it's up to you. If you do wish to have them turned on, just so you know that we are recording this session and your image will potentially appear in the recording. So welcome everybody, it's good to see you. So just 2 more seconds and we'll just get started with the session as soon as we let everybody in. Okay. So once more, thank you very much for joining one of our many webinars of MCTC, Mashaf Carmel Training Center. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, and it's a pleasure to have Rachel Caplin with us, joining our team of experienced webinar deliverers. So Rachel, thank you very much for being with us here today. What I want to do is give you a short introduction to the actual lecture, and then I will give the microphone to Rachel. So as I was saying, your microphones are at the moment muted. This is to avoid any background noise. We would please ask you to keep them that way. If you do want to have your video on, you can turn your camera, but just so you know, this session has been recorded and it will be available in our YouTube channel in the next few days. So all of those that may have any potential issues with the internet connection, don't worry, because you can always still watch this webinar online at a later date. So I will say that Rachel was actually born and raised in Perth in Western Australia, where she obtained a Bachelor of Commerce, Management and Human Resources. She also has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Communications. She went on to obtain a Master's as well of International Relations in Political and Economics from the University of Melbourne and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Rachel moved to Israel in 2015, and she immersed herself in the startup nation as a technology scout for the Israel-Australia Chamber of Commerce, where she promotes technology-driven bilateral trade for Israel. Rachel is a non-executive board member at 2 non-profit organizations. One of them is Click, which offers social and vocational opportunities for the elderly. And the second one is Dream Doctors Israel. They integrates therapeutic medical clowns into hospital medical staff teams throughout Israel and disaster relief missions abroad. So today joining us to talk about the use of technology for the benefit of the elderly population and the impact in the care management. So Rachel, hello. How are you? You can unmute yourself and say hello to our lovely audience. Actually,
thank you for that very kind introduction.
It's my pleasure. You know, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the registrations, but we actually have people here from literally all over the world, from all continents.
Quite amazing.
Yes, it is amazing. And you even have some people from Australia, they actually register as well.
Could be my mum.
Well, that's good. She's always welcome. Exactly. So
exactly.
Hello to Australia and hello to everyone that's joining us in this webinar. So welcome all. So I'm going to share my screen so you can actually see Rachel's presentation.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the very, very kind introduction. I guess sort of, first of all, to say thank you for allowing me to come and to address the very broad and the very diverse network that you have in the community that you've built all over the world. I think that the current circumstances that we're in with the COVID-19 pandemic present so many challenges, but the opportunity to get so many people from all around the world at the same time for a discussion on important topics, I think is really a golden opportunity. So again, thank you very much. So today, as correctly stated before, we're talking about technology and the aging population. Next. So before diving in, just to give an overview of what I hope that we'll be able to achieve in talking about today. And if there are any questions, from what I understand, there will be time at the end to ask questions, but this is an overview of what I hope to cover, and we'll be very happy to try and answer your questions. So the first and foremost is why this topic is important to me. As you heard, my background is quite diverse in sort of what I've studied and worked in, so I think that's important context. And then why this topic is important in general, which sort of formulates the business case. Want to talk about the spectrum or the ecosystem of aging technology and just how far and how broadly that really reaches. I'm going to try relate as much as I can to how it relates uniquely to developing countries, because obviously that is the audience today, and there are different needs and issues that do arise depending on the different geographies. I will be bringing some examples from Israel, but I want to state first and foremost that I don't represent any of the companies that I'll be talking about. Any information that I give is publicly available information, just to showcase some more tangible examples of sort of the theories and concepts that I'll be talking about. Next. Okay, so a bit about myself, just to build on the very kind introduction that I had before. So growing up in Perth is a very unique opportunity in itself, in that it is about as far away from anything in the world as you can possibly get. And I grew up in this very small and very tight-knit community within Perth. And what I found on reflection, thinking about it, is that growing up in that environment was sort of like an incubator. And that's a word that's thrown around a lot in the technological world. But what it basically did was it really imbued a sense of responsibility, of leadership, social conscience. And this is something that has followed me throughout my career as a student, and now in the high-tech world. And that's something that will also tie into sort of what I hope to speak about today. I've been living in Israel now for 5 years, and I work for a nonprofit organization that tries to build commercial and business relationships between Australia and Israel. We do help Israeli companies to enter markets all over the world, not only Australia. I'm very, very lucky to be in the position that I am. I get to meet a lot of very smart, very inspiring people all the time who are always looking to solve big problems. And I think that that is the underlying secret sauce of any successful company, is they found a problem that needed to be solved. And when we're talking about the elderly, there are plenty of those around. So that's a bit of sort of extra context about me. Next. Thanks, Neria. So this is my grandma. Her name is Marion Delcano. She passed away almost 2 years ago. And like I said at the beginning, the question of why technology for the aging population is important to me comes from this person. My grandma was one of my best friends, one of the greatest loves of my life. And she was diagnosed with dementia when she was in her early 80s. And that presented a range of different opportunities and challenges. And it really made me think very differently about what elderly care means, what it means to engage with the elderly, and how important it is for people who are going to be hopefully living a long life. Those last 20 to 30 years should be quality years, and how technology can be used to achieve that. Next. One of the challenges that we had when I moved to Israel 5 years ago was I was used to speaking to my grandma every day. And usually I would call her on the phone. And as her dementia progressed, she was not able to answer the phone. She didn't remember how phones worked. And it became impossible for me to call her. And the only way that I was able to communicate with her every day was I would have to call the old aged home, and then they would take the iPad. They had one iPad in the whole place, and they would put it in front of her, and then we would Skype from there. And this is a real picture of us on Skype one day. But what I found was that I was thinking, I'm very lucky that I had the people that were able to facilitate this for me, but there must be a better way. There must be a better way for people to be able to communicate with people that they love who are far away, who are older, who do not use technology in the same way that we do. And this really began my journey to try and understand and explore how technology can be used for the elderly population. Next. Okay. So to really dive in, many of you will be well aware of the facts and the figures that demonstrate just how much and how rapidly the world's population is aging. I put some facts and figures up here for you to be able to see, because to talk about technology for the aging population, it begs the question first, if there's really a market at all. So I always start with these numbers, because when you look at the numbers, there's just no way to deny that seniors are going to be a massive market for technology and everything else. They already are now, but certainly in the years to come. I would like to draw your attention to just two of these particular facts. One is that all regions have substantial increased life expectancy since 1950. And that goes across the board depending, and it doesn't depend on the region that you are in. Your life expectancy is higher than what it once was. And this puts a substantial social and economic burden on every country. And depending on the resources that you have will sort of depend how you're able to manage that problem. And the other one is that first point there, that the population age 65 and plus is growing faster than all other age groups. The pyramid is essentially turned upside down on its head. People are having fewer children and the elderly are living for longer. And this is the first time in history that this is happening, meaning that regardless of whether one wants to accept that these are the demographic trends, they simply are the facts. Next. So in my day job, I tend to spend a lot of time with startups or large companies who have a technological solution for banks or other enterprises. So for example, one of our largest clients who I manage directly, it's one of the largest banks in South America. And they're wonderful people, and they have such a forward-thinking approach to technology and how the bank can better service its customers. They nearly employ 100,000 people. But while technologies related to finance and payments are important and they're interesting and they can make our lives easier and they create jobs, what I love talking about technology for the aging population is that it fuses that pure market strategy that I tend to work with every day with the social conscience that I was raised to have. And what I love to do is to take everything that I see and learn from the pure business world and bring it to areas which have more of a social impact. As I mentioned earlier, my grandma is at the forefront of why this topic became meaningful for me. And I like to think of her in these discussions, what I would want for her if I could wind back the clock and make those last decades of her life better and easier, though thank God she lived a very happy life. And so with her in mind, I invite all of you to think of someone who's close to you, especially when considering what I tend to lead with in this discussion, which is 5 questions that we need to ask ourselves as a society and 5 questions for tech or for business people. And the first question for society is population aging going to lead to a longer period of good health and quality of life and well-being? Or is it just a longer period of disease, disability, and dependency? And that really is the crux of what our responsibility is to answer that question. The second question is, how is aging going to affect healthcare and social costs? And depending on where you are in the world, the significance of that question will sort of hold a different weight. The third question is, are these futures inevitable? Whatever answers you had to the first and the second questions, do we have the power to change those? Or do we simply have to come up with ways to deal with those realities. And again, I think every region and country will come up with different answers for themselves. The fourth question is, how is aging going to impact developing countries? Again, the unit economics, the challenges and the opportunities are completely different. When it comes to technologies, there's often a lot of emphasis on the US, on Japan, on Europe, and that's a very small portion of the world. I think it's important to take a whole view of the world when talking about these kind of questions. And the last question is, how is loneliness going to affect elderly quality of life? There have been a number of studies into this question in recent years, and all of them come to the same conclusion, that the impact of social isolation on the elderly can have not only emotional effects, but significant physical, physiological health effects as well. And as people are living longer and choosing to stay at home, there is a greater chance that people are going to be alone. So then the question turns to the business and the technology people. The first question is, who is the customer in this market? Is your customer the old person? Is your customer the person taking care of the old person? Or is it their family? And those are really, really key questions. The second question is a question you ask regardless of what industry you're in, which is, how big is the market size? And I think we answered already that the market size is very, very big. The third question is, how do we access the largest aging populations? And I want to just mention a couple of figures here. Looking at China, currently there are 110 million people considered elderly in China. That number by 2050 is going to be 330 million. That's 3 times the size. In India, we're looking at 60 million today. It's going to reach 227 million by 2050. It's an increase of 280%. But the question for technologists and for companies, how do I access those markets? They're entirely different. And the fourth and the fifth questions are fundamental. I won't go into them too much now because we're going to answer them throughout. But the first one is, how do we establish product market fit? Again, a question that you ask regardless of the market that you're talking about. And the fifth question is, how do you build technology for people who are not comfortable using technology? That's a very big, big challenge. Next. Perhaps the biggest piece of advice that I give to aspiring entrepreneurs in this market, or companies that see the opportunity to pivot an existing solution to the aging population, is to remember that products for this market are not addressing a single uniform cohort. There's not one solution that works for everyone. Over the years, there have been many technologies that were launched and they failed because they couldn't connect with their intended audience. What it usually boils down to is a team that didn't really take the time to get to know the broad spectrum of what the senior market really is. There seems to be a misunderstanding that if a technology could legitimately bring benefit to the customer, then the customer will adopt it. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way, especially when there is a spectrum of tech savviness within that particular demographic. So therefore, the best solutions for this market either must make peace with only targeting a subsection of the population, say seniors who are tech savvy or seniors who are still physically active, or they can provide a solution that can be variable and adapted depending on how tech savvy, how physically active, or what the living situation is for the consumer. So for example, if a company wanted to offer a solution that helps older people to feel more connected and safe, there are different devices that would be developed for different ends of the spectrum. And an older person who has an iPhone or any kind of smartphone could use that device that has inbuilt health and safety features. But if there's someone who's less comfortable using technology and they don't have a smartphone, there are other devices that a person is able to use. So these are really important questions that any entrepreneur or any company or anyone providing products or services for this market has to consider. Next. The premise of this presentation is that technology can benefit the aging population. And before going further, I want to justify that assumption first by questioning it. In my mind, Technology has had a significant impact on the rapidly growing aging population from a consumer and a commercial perspective. On an individual level, technology supports older people and their caregivers. It can provide quality of life, independence, safety, and on a commercial level, there can be bottom line benefits as well, which is also important when looking at where technology is going to fit into the broader economy of the place. There are functional, physical, and emotional and cognitive needs of the elderly that need to be addressed. And these are the four sort of parameters that anything that is examining elderly care, or really any sort of personal care. So I figure that's a good framework to look at this. When it comes to the elderly, the functional needs that an elderly person has can be hygiene, safety, nutritional needs, taking their medicine on time. Physical assistance can relate to communication, mobility, driving at times. The emotional needs of the elderly are also particularly important, and I'll touch on that in more detail later. And the cognitive needs are important as well, as they relate to memory, judgment, and reasoning. I just want to add sort of a short story here. When I went to visit my grandma a few months before I went the second time, when she passed away, and she had dementia, as I mentioned. And we sat down with her to do a puzzle, and it was a puzzle that any child could have done. It had maybe 10 pieces, and my grandma simply couldn't do it. And it was very frightening for us to realize that dementia is not simply forgetting things. People associate dementia with memory only. It is an entire sphere. It's a wholesome cognitive decline across all the different faculties and capabilities. And that's something that I just wanted to mention, because I know it's a very widespread misconception, and one that I certainly had up until then. It was quite frightening to see. On that note, I want to talk about caregivers, because caregivers, as I said, can sometimes be the customer for technology when it comes to the aging population. And any company that is looking to offer a service or a product in this area must consider caregivers, who are often really the ones on the front lines, who are determining the quality of life and the safety of the aging population. I'd always known how important caregivers were until I went to Australia when my grandma was unwell. Thank God she was only unwell for 3 weeks before she passed away. And I got on a plane and I flew. And I was essentially all day and eventually all night at this old aged home. And I got to see how these amazing people, the work that they do and the way that they do it. I will never forget that the people who work in elderly care deserve not only our appreciation, but they deserve our support to make their jobs easier. Because their job is to look after people who we love, or at the very least, people who deserve to live that last chapter of their life with dignity and with comfort. And caregivers can take many forms. Often it's family, or it can be in-home aides, professional caregivers. And the aim of technology should be to support professional caregivers and the medical staff to achieve that triple aim of healthcare, which is better outcomes, lower costs, and greater patient experience. Next. So many of you will be familiar with the concept of KYC, which stands for Know Your Customer. It's often used in many business contexts, like for a bank, it could be to verify the identity of a customer before or during the time that they start to do business. But on a broader level, KYC means exactly that. It means know who your customer is. And it's the first important step in verifying product market fit. An entrepreneur can develop the most cutting edge, cool product in the world. But if there's no need for it, and if there's no market for it, it's not going to go anywhere. So the developers and the teams surrounding them must really know the challenges that face old people every day. And they must be able to tailor a solution to the number of factors that makes each elderly person unique. Again, if you were to think of someone that you know from your personal perspective, and to answer all of these questions, age, location, etc., we would come up with so many different profiles. each of us just here in this conversation. So there's really a very broad spectrum there. So in other industries where it happens less, there's not always as much variability within a target market. When it comes to the aging population, it really has to appeal to a broad range of functional skill levels, and that ideally can be modified without a significant increase in cost. It's all very well to have an option that is more accessible for someone who's not comfortable with tech, but if that puts the price up by 200%, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great option. So one example could be mobility. For older people who can't drive, carpooling can be a great option. So companies that develop the infrastructure for a sort of ride sharing service could do so with one option that accesses it through a smartphone app and one that doesn't. So it's the same service, but it's appealing to different people within the elderly market. The bottom line really is that I think the most successful and effective innovations in the elderly market are going to be based on two things, and that is simplicity and thoughtfulness. Those two things, and you'll have at least a good chance. I'd like to just mention quickly, as we talked about at the beginning, I sit on the board of two nonprofit organizations, and one of them is called Click. And Click does a number of amazing things. And one of them, which we recently only launched this year, is called the Elder Lab, which we have a center where around 200 elderly people come every day, and they're taught different skills to create products that can then be sold. So there's a vocational aspect, there's a social aspect. And what we decided to do was to open up this physical place to entrepreneurs who are interested in developing products for the elderly market, to come and to meet the elderly people, to see what it's actually like for older people. We've got a very diverse population within those 200 people. So trying to just open your mind to really not guessing what the needs of the elderly people are. Go and speak to them, go and meet them before you decide to try and build a product that's going to meet their needs. Next. Okay, I'm going to just mention a couple of different examples and sort of subcategories of technologies for the aging population. In developing economies, from what I understand, smart home technology has proven challenging since system costs can often be a prohibiting factor. That said, there's a definite trend towards more affordable solutions within this domain. And there are cost-effective alternatives. And I think that the cost effectiveness of certain basics of this infrastructure is becoming more popular and definitely more accessible. There are 6 categories within smart home technology: safety, health and nutrition, physical activity, personal hygiene and care, social engagement. Again, we talked about isolation and loneliness, and leisure. Leisure at the end may sound like a luxury, but what it really refers to is being able to spend your free time in a meaningful and engaging way. And that's something that I think is a right. Sorry, just a second. Okay. One example that I wanted to talk about is IoT, which is the Internet of Things. The underlying premise of which is that technologies are connected to each other. So if, for example, you were to have a sensor installed in a person's home that is able to track the person's daily activities, eating, sleeping, the technology is able to create and to build baseline patterns for what that person does using some form of predictive analytics. And it can then identify any significant changes in those patterns that could indicate a situation that requires intervention. So for example, the sensor can be connected to the person's digital diary, which could know if they should be leaving for a medical appointment or should be taking a particular pill, and it can alert the person if they have forgotten to do so. It can build a pattern to know that the person typically only spends a few minutes in the bathroom. They've been in there a long time, and an alert is able to be sent to a caregiver just to check that everything's okay. And this connectedness allows the person to live their life as normal without too much disturbance, where intervention measures are there only if needed. Next. Wearable devices, they're arguably the most mainstream of digital health tools today, and could play a big role for elderly care as well. In the section about smart homes, I mentioned the sort of wearable devices that can be connected to each other, and often they look at monitoring basic things like heart rates. It can also track a person's location. But wearables can be far more sophisticated than that. And I came across an idea a couple of months ago, which is a wearable dialysis device. My father has chronic kidney failure, so this is something that's of close personal importance as well. A typical challenge with kidney dialysis is needing to book an appointment. You wait for a time, you go to the place, and while the actual dialysis is being performed, you can't move. You certainly can't go to work. You certainly can't have a social engagement during that time. And for some people, it can be every day. So to have some portable wearable device that allows the convenience of having this process done on demand can allow people to go about their daily routine as per normal. So I really invite you and the people in your communities to think creatively about what wearable devices can really do. There's one Israeli company that I wanted to mention as well. So just a second. And that's called MindU, which is MYNDYOU. So I just want to charge my phone just because it's low on battery. MindU is an artificial intelligence driven solution. Sorry. And it's a wearable device that someone can wear like a bracelet. And it's not tracking just your heart rate or any of these things like the any sort of Apple device is able to do these days. It is monitoring over time a person's speech and other activities that are related to cognitive function. Because what happens is that a person can get older and they will maybe go and see someone who specializes in cognition, let's say maximum once a year. And based on that one-time engagement, there will be a prognosis given. And often there is so much change between 1 year and the next that if a solution had been given and there had been some kind of intervention earlier, then the treatment could have been far more effective. So what this does is it just tracks without the older person having to do anything, having to go anywhere in particular. It tracks those very gradual everyday changes in cognitive function. And it's also then able to send recommendations to the person's caregiver or to their healthcare provider to try and catch the initial signs of conditions like dementia earlier on, because the earlier the diagnosis, the better the chance of being able to at least prolong the time before the illness really takes hold. Next. Okay, so smart textiles. I find these really interesting because they can track different parameters in a really organic way, because simply by using clothes without anything that needs to be remembered to be worn or attached or taken off. One challenge with wearable devices is that if they're not used or worn, then the benefits won't be realized. And this is particularly so for the elderly who may find it inconvenient or annoying to have to put on some sort of additional device. And for those facing cognitive decline, there is a good chance that they could forget to put on the wearable device to begin with. Clothes, on the other hand, are a necessity in most places and most climates. And hence, to embed biosensors within the textiles themselves, it can be a good way to support greater usage of the technology and therefore the outcomes. Smart textiles are obviously, and all of these are not exclusively aging population technologies, but if the technology can be used to detect signs that suggest there's a deviation from some normal pattern, which for elderly people can be an emergency, then there are obvious and positive implications for the older market as well. Next. Voice. So voice-enabled technology is really breakthrough in that it allows elderly people to accomplish tasks without having to learn to do anything new. All they have to do is talk, and elderly people usually have been talking for a very long time by then. They don't need to learn to press particular buttons or to do anything there. And as life expectancies increase, chances are older people will be spending more time at home, and voice technology can make being at home more comfortable and connected. So for example, allowing the elderly to do things like control the light, temperature, to schedule appointments at the doctor, getting alarms to take their pills, setting a reminder to eat, which for many elderly people is also an important thing, and also getting answers to basic questions. And on that, what's amazing with voice technology is that it can be a companion as well, because voice assistants are available 24 hours a day for talking, responding to queries, answering questions. And there are some elderly people who have very close relationships with their family. Lots of people come to see them and take them places. They have a close community, but that's not the case for everyone at all. From a healthcare perspective, artificial intelligence-based voice technology, it can be used to address resource shortage issues that are prevalent, I'm pretty sure, across the world when it comes to healthcare. So some routine or repetitive tasks could be assigned to virtual assistants so that healthcare workers can focus on more complex issues. And I just want to make a note here. I'm a big advocate that technology does not replace people in pretty much any industry, not just talking about elderly care. I think that the joining of human and technology is where the optimum is going to be achieved. But to think that a voice-based technology is going to replace people coming to visit old people or people having person-to-person relationships, I don't think is realistic or particularly healthy. There's an Israeli company, again, that I wanted to mention here, which is called Intuition Robotics. They have built a digital home companion for the elderly. And what I love about them is that they spent cumulatively 10,000 days in the home of elderly people to gather the data that they needed to build this robot. And the youngest person that they gathered the data from was 78, and the oldest person was 97. I wish that all companies would do the same in-depth homework with the development of their products, because I really just thought that was amazing. And you can definitely go online and see the product that they've developed. And just on, I mean, this company, what's really interesting is the same core technology that they built intended for the elderly market. They now have a collaboration with Toyota, because the same way that people are driving and they want to have, you know, that voice-based technology that can do certain tasks for them while driving. I mean, you wouldn't have thought there was too much overlap between the automotive industry and the elderly market, but apparently there is. So that's also very exciting. Next. Okay, this is the last sort of subcategory. I think everyone who has ever known an older person knows that it's very, very possible for an old person to feel that they don't have the same sense of purpose that they had when they were young, that they don't contribute to society the same way they used to, that while they used to provide for their family, they're now a burden on people that they love. It can lead to depression and overall just very poor quality of life. And there's no solution for this, but I would like to introduce you to a platform. This is the one company that I did speak with the founder, and I have permission to sort of introduce it to you in a more in-depth way, because it's something that if you know people that this could be appropriate for, they can sign up today. Next. So this is a company called Sage, which is based on the idea that people who have retired or who are older are not burdens. They are resources with great knowledge and skills that they've accumulated over time. And why not connect them with younger people who can benefit from the wisdom of those skills? So if you, I'm very happy to send through the website. I don't have it here, but I'm very happy to. So this is the page that you land on. Next. And let's say you're looking to, let's say if I was a young person, which I am, and I was trying to find an older person who could teach me a number of different skills. And they have pages upon pages of these older people who are just regular older people, and they are able to give me a class either online or in person, depending on sort of COVID restrictions. And you can choose what's interesting to you. Next. And if you're an older person that has a skill that you think could work, you click on become a sage at the top. Next. And you can talk to someone from the company, and they will help you to choose what your skill can be, how to price it. You can make a financial gain off this. It's really there to try and build a financial and social connection between the younger and the older generations. And it's something that I think is a fantastic idea. I would love to see this being replicated in different places all over the world. So I've mentioned a few times, there are obvious differences in the accessibility to and the affordability of some technologies in different parts of the world. And realistically, there are many companies that their first market that they're looking for is the US. And that's pretty much it. That said, there are a number of factors that indicate that if not already now, certainly in the years to come, there will be more access to affordable technology for the aging population in Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, etc. So one factor is smartphone ownership. These rates tend to vary substantially from up to 60% in Brazil and other places to just around, from what I understand, 40% in Indonesia, Kenya, Nigeria. It seems to be lowest in India, which was one of the reports that I read, but across the board, ownership rates across all age groups in developing countries tend to be lower, which is not totally surprising, but there is an upward trend across all of these regions, and it's most prevalent among young people. But what's critical to remember here is that those young people will soon be older and more tech savvy, and those young people will, even sooner than that, they will be caregivers to some extent. So it's very promising to keep in mind. The second point is regarding smart textiles, is where the markets are. You know, China and India, two of the major manufacturers of smart textiles and the largest producer of the fibers that really form sort of the foundations of what this technology is built on. So for a country to not have to necessarily import all or any of the parts can also change the market dynamics for developing economies in particular. So the last point that I wanted to touch on is the prevalence of telehealth. In the last few months, we've seen just how influential it can be for populations that are remote to be able to access proper healthcare. Can be literally a question of life or death, and overcoming geographical barriers and that kind of access. And I think we're seeing that it is slowly starting to reach developing economies more and more. And it's not one of the domains that we talked about in detail today, but I did want to mention it because it really can change the quality of life of aging populations all over the world. Next, I think that's it, I remember. Yep, that's it. Just reminder to us all to treat the elderly with the respect that they deserve, and very happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was a very, very interesting presentation, truly was. And you're so right in bringing this up, because all of us undoubtedly have a member of family or friend that is, you know, getting a little bit older and is going to need some assistance. And I'll encourage everybody to please, if they have any questions, to write it in the chat. There is one question I would like to start from Adamu. It says that the age population will be higher in developing countries in 2050. You were referring to compared to time, or just referring to developed countries?
Sorry, again?
when you mentioned the aging population is on the increase, you were referring it from the point of view of that is a global effect, or is it mainly within the emerging economies?
Global, and it's one of the only trends that is global, which is really interesting, because usually when you go and you find particular research, you read through it and then you realize, oh, it's only talking about America, England, Canada, and Australia, or whatever it is. This is something that's global, to different extents in different places, of course. And, you know, truth is also that the dynamics of the rates of having children affects what those dynamics look like as well. For example, here in Israel, there's a very high birth rate compared to other countries. So the shape of that pyramid looks different, but across the world, the population is aging.
Thank you so much. Another question that we had was regarding how resistant do we find our elderly population to change, and how we can actually help them overcome those difficulties? If you can have any examples on
Sure.
that.
I'll tell you a story just to show you how much I can feel this one. When my grandma was probably in her 80s, my mum wanted to buy her a phone so that if she fell or if anything happened, she could call. And my grandma hated the phone. She didn't want it at all. And at some point she called up the company and said, I want you to end my contract with this phone. I don't want it anymore. And the company said, okay, we've ended your contract. You can get rid of the phone. And my grandma took a hammer and she destroyed this phone on her table. But what we found out later was she accidentally destroyed her home phone instead of her mobile phone. So I understand there is great resistance to technology. And this is why any technology that's developed for the aging population has to be made for the aging population. Or if it's made for the caregivers, then it can be slightly different. And this is where doing the market research on what is an older person willing to use, what are they not willing to use. And you can't force people to use something that they don't want to use. That's really the bottom line. And that's where, if there is resistance to a product that would really benefit the elderly person, that they either won't use it or they can't, think about positioning it to the caregiver instead. So the elderly person can still get that benefit, but it will actually be used by someone who's comfortable and willing to use it.
Brilliant. Can you also discuss the particular situation of COVID-19 and the practical ideas on how to help the elderly with loneliness during these lockdowns while still keeping them safe?
Exactly. The organization that I sit on the board with, we have something called the virtual lecture program. And usually it's like once or twice a week, elderly people who were bound to their homes, who weren't able to leave home, would have some kind of lecture or activity done through the TV, and it was connected. And when COVID-19 hit and everyone was home, I actually led a project within the organization to fill that virtual lecture program, that they would have all day. There would be content that they could engage with different young people in particular. And so that is something that if there is the infrastructure for an older person, it can be through their TV. They don't have to have a computer. There's an Israeli company that can turn any TV into this connected device, because I know there are some elderly people who they love watching TV, but computers just aren't really sort of part of their world. So that's what we did. And I basically reached out to everyone that I know who has ever done anything interesting, and they would come online and talk to these old people for half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour, just about their experience. So anything that you can do that brings people to them in a virtual way that they know, and if that's by computer or by TV. But the company that I introduced also at the end, which is Sage, that's something that people can do, because it's something that any older person can do from the comfort of their home, and it gives them purpose, gives them meaning and feeling like they have something to teach others, which is so important from the emotional side as well.
One of our listeners also mentioned something regarding the cost of this technology. which is quite problematic, especially for emerging economies. Have you come across here companies, Israeli companies, that they actually go and test the market, perhaps not just in America, but to other countries, to other, India or whatever.
Anywhere else besides America? It's a great question. Unfortunately, most companies are pretty America focused. That said, what I am seeing is that the cost of manufacturing and producing these products is dropping as it's becoming more popular and there are more companies doing it. The unit economics is becoming more affordable. So whatever's not affordable now in an emerging technology, I see the promise that within years to come, and we're not talking like many years, but around the corner, I think it will be more affordable. And what I mentioned at the end about smartphone ownership, a lot of this technology is embedded into a smart device. And as ownership is increasing, as I said, it's mainly among the younger population, but those younger people are going to get older. Those younger people will be taking care of the older people. So the fact that maybe the robots are still going to be very expensive and they're not necessarily going to be entering the emerging economies anytime soon, but certain aspects of these technologies through smart devices and those becoming more affordable and more accessible, I think we're going to see that it's going to be more affordable. And to answer your question, have I seen any companies that are doing it? Not off the top of my head. It doesn't mean that it's not happening, but it's something I would love to look into, and if not, to encourage people, because there are huge market opportunities as well in other places.
Definitely there are. I don't know if you have any other questions from our audience. I'm just quickly checking it out. Sure. I don't know, we can maybe lift the microphone for someone that might want to ask a question. We're not that many, so I think we can allow one person to ask. Hold on a second. If you can, I was actually hoping to spot somebody that asked me earlier if they could ask a question, and I'm trying to find them for you. But I don't seem to see them right now. I can't see them. Maybe it's this person. Hold on a second. Sorry, I'm not sure. They asked me, and I can actually see them in this second. If anybody wants to ask a question, please put your hand up with your reactions at the bottom of the screen. Or Juna is asking as well how to tackle resistance to change. I think, Juna, you joined us a little bit later. I think we've already discussed that a little bit, but if you want to summarize, yeah, of course.
The bottom line in terms of resistance to change is that it's very difficult, and there's only.
Okay, so we've got Musa Assad would like to ask a question. So let me just unmute him, and we'll hear him. See if he comes on. Musa, are you there with us? Ah, there you are.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your great presentations. And I would like to take a moment to thank Hava and Sarah for incredible work for MSTS. I have one question about you was asking about the populations. I'm going to talk about my country and my community. Before, if you think about come back to 20, 30 years ago, like our grandfather and our parents, they didn't use technology. Most of them, they were living in the village, and most of their time they were spending on agriculture, shipping, and they were doing that stuff, and they have more physical activity. If we compare from now, the most people, they are using technology, and they are staying at homes. That people, if you talk about the age, our parents, they were living longer age, like 15, 18, 95. They were living because they didn't use technology and they have more physical activity and they were more connected to the agriculture, shipping, and stuff like that. They were living in good health. And there were a huge difference between the people who living in the village and in the city. It's about the health. It's very different for the health. And one more question about the. I have some question and some explanation. I just wanted to know.
No, yeah, I was going to say I've heard people say that one of the things that kills us is chairs,
Yes.
escalators,
Yes.
because we don't, to not get up and down off the floor, and these things that our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents they would do. So you're 100% correct.
Yes, that's why I'm telling you. Like our parents, they were living 18, but like right now, people like age in 15 and 16, maybe 45, they are stops. They don't have even they walk, and some of them they have heart attack and they have diseases. But our parents, no, they were in good health because they were doing physical activity and they were
An
living
interesting
yes.
balance.
And about the populations, it's our parents like before they have more children. For example, my grandparents they have like 12, 13 around, and 14 until 14 they have 14 children. But right now, like when someone get married, they have two children. They have two children. It's a huge difference. It's for populations. So that's why I'm telling you. Maybe for some age, you have less kids in that during age. Like for example, between 20 to 30, you have 100 kids. But for example, if you go back to our parents, maybe in that age they have 500 kids. So it's huge difference for the populations because it's connected to the technology. Like people right now they are using too much technology and they are thinking different things, so they have less kids. And one more thing about the economic, about the cost. Before, like we were all, it's connected to it's our work. They were working and we were providing like the product for our markets. We were doing agriculture and everything. We were providing like our parents providing product for our market. But now, like when our parents, some of them they passed away, they dead, and this new generations, the new generation, all is connected to the technology, is connected to the chair. They are sitting only the homes. They don't think like to go what they parented, go to the agriculture, go to the products. No, we are all is depending to the export. Like for example, if like 10 days the border is closed, like, and then you will realize like how it's important to take care of your things, agriculture, and to provide stuff for your economy, about the economic.
You're 100% right. All of those dynamics sort of play into this very complex question of how the pyramids of demography look different in different places across the world as technology is changing, values are changing, work ethic is changing. What's considered important for our parents and grandparents is different to what it is today.
Physical activity and program is very important for elderly peoples. And I can give you more example for like during the lockdowns and when the COVID knows them. Because we are working in the in Dog province, like there are around 16, 17 refugee and IDP camps around the Dog cities. During the lockdown for 2-3 months, like we were visiting the elderly people. Like there were a lot of elderly people, and the women and the men they were living in the tent. and they couldn't, they didn't let them, and they could not go out like to provide what they need. So we have to like to connect with them, like what they need, like the food, medicines, and how to take their medicines, about the hygienes, and many things. So we have to visit him and to show him about teach him. And I know it's lockdowns, but you don't have like to like all the day to sit in the tents. You have to like sometimes go to at least like 30 minutes, go to walk and change your place. Not all the day sit in your chairs. It's not good for you and for your health. Like only sits and take medicines and food and sit again. So we were trying to help him.
Wow.
Sorry.
Thank you, Musa. Thank you very much, Musa, for your insights. It's much appreciated, and we're happy to see you here with us. Musa actually works with in Kurdistan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yes.
I think Rachel missed that part. So
No,
just
I was trying to guess a couple of places. So.
Yeah, well now it's clear for everybody. Yeah. So excellent. Thank you and welcome.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you, Rachel, because someone is saying that the issue of technology for elderly with disabilities, it seems to be a bit lacking. It's a little bit behind, and they're not being, the issues have not been adequately solved. Have you got any insight on those?
Well, I'd be interested if you mean physical disabilities or other sort of learning disabilities in general, because obviously
I think it's physical disability.
So talking about physical disabilities, and that was sort of part of the spectrum. That I said that it's a very big question. How mobile is this person? An elderly person who is able to go and get something that they need, or is able to go for a walk, or to join their family at dinner, is very, very different to someone who isn't. There are a lot of technologies here in Israel that are related to mobility. They're not necessarily only for the elderly, but I'm happy to send through a couple of examples which are trying to make it more easy, either for elderly people to kind of walk in some kind of way, or just to be able to do everyday tasks that they need to. There's one called Rewalk, REWALK, that might be interesting to look at.
That's an amazing one, definitely.
Yeah, so there are a number that sort of fit into that category, but I agree there needs to be more.
More and cheaper, unfortunately.
Definitely.
Anyway, so listen, we've really run out of time, and we really have enjoyed listening to you today. It's been really a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I thank everybody for being here with us today. And don't forget, this session was recorded and it is available in our YouTube channel. You can continue looking into our future activities as well. There'll be many more coming our way, so please keep an eye on our social media. And thanks again for being here with us, Rachel. It was really a pleasure, and all the best, much success.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Everyone, take care.
Thank you.